on silent.
You should put them on silent. 7.
I think though too, when we start doing the podcast, I was gonna put the phones on.
Right. So.
I'm taking the butt.
All right.
I have definitely.
So, 9 a.m. All right, folks. Ryan and I are sufficiently
Caffeinated. And nicotinated.
Therefore protonated.
Yeah, fully protonated.
Caffeine plus nicotine equals protein. Get some. Just kidding.
I invented a word just then, nicotinated.
But we're going to jump back into our series on the 13 Fatal Errors by W. Stephen Brown.
Walter.
Is it Walter?
I don't know. I'm just going with it.
We really should have researched this. It was a question in the last one, but I go like this. When I John Cena that shit, get rid of it.
Cut.
All right. But anyways, so we're going to dive back into 13 Fatal Errors, number 7 and 8. So today we're going to be talking about concentrating on problems rather than objectives. Huge problem in every organization. We do it all the time. And it's something that drives me bonkers. But I guess maybe we're pretty experienced and able to talk about this. You see him nodding his head like he's rocking out. Like, everybody does it. So, don't look at me sideways. Anyways, being a buddy and not a boss is number 8. So let's jump right on into it. Do you want to intro either of those, or how do we want to go about this?
Sure. I mean, we can the concentrating on problems rather than objectives. I think that we like to synonymously call problems puzzles.
Mm-hmm. It was funny. I was laughing because I was rereading before we started. I even highlighted it.
Ooh.
A number of years ago, I consulted with a company that recognizes this failing of management. In response, they attempted to eliminate the word problem from their vocabulary of their managers. Their associates referred to the problems as opportunities.
There we go.
But he goes on to say how that was a failure of them because they focused on opportunities and let them become insurmountable.
Mm-hmm.
Long story short, we shouldn't be focusing on problems. It's majoring in the minors. So maybe we should go into that a little bit with some personal experiences in the organization.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it, I mean, it's kind of boiled down to what we were talking about before this video of like, in my experience, when one of the things that I like to think about in the sense of problems, we tend to put spotlights on little things, right? So like inherently when we put the spotlight on a little thing, it kind of takes the shine away from the big things. Mm-hmm. One of the questions that I like to ask myself is, does this even matter in the greater scheme of things, mm-hmm. right? Are we putting a tremendous amount of effort, multiple people's brains, trying to deduce or solve this finite problem that really has no impact on the overall picture of the business or the health of the business? So like, we've had many meetings where we've talked about very small problems for hours.
Getting into the weeds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's, it's like everybody has a opinion on the problem or a potential solution. Rarely do those solutions cohesively align, mm-hmm. right? They're all kind of, here's my idea, here's my idea, here's my idea. None of those ideas are the same. They all generally get to the same outcome. Some of them may take an hour, some of them may take a week, whatever it is. But I like to look at problems from a top-down approach, mm-hmm. of like, here is a fracture in a system, right? Mm-hmm. That created this problem, which created this problem, which created this problem. Mm-hmm. But we tend to focus on the fourth problem,
yep.
right? And we tend to not put a lot of energy or thought into the 30,000-foot view of the fracture that caused the problem. And then you spend an exorbitant amount of time and wasted energy and payroll hours trying to deduce a small problem that really at the end of the day doesn't matter, right? So
just to spin on that, a thought that I've kind of come up with, and kind of was reiterated while rereading the chapter, was that I think that a lot of the times the people who overly focus on problems, generally the people who like to push at problems that are happening in other departments, are generally the ones that are failing in their department.
Right.
So there's a little bit of this shift of let's focus the attention on that fourth piece in the chain, even though I was part of the fracture
Right.
that caused this.
Blame shifting.
The blame shifting. So it's similar to one of the other topics that we went over, but I just thought it was important to note that generally when you see somebody who's a problem pointer, we should probably focus on their productivity and find out what's going on there.
Right.
You know?
It's fun, and this will skew a little bit off topic, but I listened to this. So I subscribe to this website that lets you purchase semesters of lectures from MIT, Harvard, Stanford, a bunch of accredited universities, right? You could basically buy the course for like $100. You don't, obviously you don't get the credits, but you get the same education, right? And this was a master's level course of human psychology, and the speaker was Jordan Peterson. This was from like, I think it was 10 years ago. But he said something, and this directly coincides with the blame shifting, that like, you know, sometimes when you hear a very simple statement and it just hits you like a fucking 2x4, and you're like, oh, sometimes I do that, right? So it's he uses this analogy, and the question that sparked this response from him was, a student in the audience asked, I'm struggling with my self-esteem because I'm not following through with the commitments that I make to myself, right? What would your suggestion be on overcoming some of these things that I'm struggling with? And he said, the way that Jordan Peterson responded, I think was just brilliant, but I mean, he's a brilliant guy, but it's, he said, okay, so let's say you have a friend and you guys decide to go to the gym together, right? And you decide to go to the gym together 5 days a week for the next 2 weeks, right? And first day, your friend calls and gives you a reason why he can't go, right? And you let it slide. Second day, same thing. Third day, same thing. Fourth day, same thing. Fifth day, same thing. And he said at one point, or at some point in that process of your friend canceling his commitment, you start to lose your trust in that person. They start to show that they're not reliable, right? And it will in turn affect your relationship with that person in the sense that that person can no longer be trusted or relied upon to follow through with X, right? He said, we have, as humans, we have a very outward view of other people's actions, and to be very judgmental and to be very damning and criticizing of them not following through with something. We have a really hard time with that internally, right? So he said, let's say it's a simple task of, I'm supposed to get this homework done, or I'm supposed to empty my dishwasher, right? And you put it off 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. It seems to have very little effect on us consciously, right? Of we're like, okay, so I made a commitment to myself that I would do this task, and now I'm putting it off, procrastinating it, right? Using, coming up with excuses as to why I can't do it. He said, my question to you is, why would we look at that as any other view of how we looked at our friend who did the same thing? So he said, I'll take it a layer deeper, right? He said, subconsciously in our brain, what you're training yourself to realize is that you're unreliable, untrustworthy, and you can't follow through with your commitments, right? But we have a really hard time flipping the window or the mirror back at us and being like, well, Johnny said that he would be going to the gym with me and he didn't. Johnny's a dick. He didn't show up, right? I can't trust Johnny anymore. I am not going to be friends with this person anymore. He said, intrinsically, that's the same thing you're doing to yourself, but you're doing that to your self-esteem, and you're doing that to your own self-reliability, which makes yourself unreliable in the sense that I can no longer depend on myself to execute X, Y, or Z, right? And instead, what we like to do is blame the things around us. I didn't empty the dishwasher because my dog pissed on the rug. I cleaned up the dog piss and I got distracted, right? I didn't empty the dishwasher because I was tired, right? I got home from class, I was tired and I didn't want to do it, right? Now, if we flip that script and your buddy's like, I'm not going to go to the gym because I'm tired and I don't want to do it, right? That excuse is not necessarily acceptable, but it's completely acceptable for us.
Right.
He said, so why don't we just measure ourselves to the same standard that we measure everybody else around us? He said, and then why don't we see what that does to our self-esteem and our reliability?
It's like innate self-preservation.
It's in like,
but it's causing a root problem inside of your
right, and it's causing it subconsciously. So like, he was talking about it, and I was like, holy shit! I was like, this is right. It's like but it's like, how many little things do we do or have we done in our life? Probably tens of thousands that we say like, I should do this, and then we put it off a day, right? And he said, I want you to look at it as a bank account in your brain, right? If you make a commitment to yourself and you follow through with that commitment, you just deposited $1. If you make a commitment to do something, you don't do that, and then you blame a reason as to why, I want you to withdraw $2. The purpose of this bank account is to just keep it in the black. That's it. But understand that every time you don't follow through with one of these things and you blame shift to something else outside of you, rather than just looking intrinsically and being like, I fucked up, right? Or I didn't follow through. Those withdrawals take twice as much away from you as those deposits do. And I'm like, that's exactly what you just said, right? In a much more long-winded format. But like, if I'm underperforming, it's a lot easier for me to place the blame elsewhere. Right? Because the last thing I want to do is look at myself and be like, oh man, I'm the one fucking up.
Well, I mean, it's a human natural tendency.
Right.
Because like I said, self-preservation. It's like you're still employed. So if you're underperforming or you're giving yourself excuses, ultimately creating this perception of I'm untrustworthy, let's change that perspective for everybody else so it's equalized playing field all the time, right? So it is, well, I mean, it talks about it in the Bible, right? These are red letter words. It's like, why focus on the sliver in your neighbor's eye when forgetting about the plank in your own eye, right? So it is important. I think, I know I took us on a little bit of a rabbit trail with the topic itself, but there generally is always a origin behind, the witch hunts, whether it's a data witch hunt, productivity witch hunt, or whatever it is. There's generally an origin, and a lot of the times it comes from insecurity. Right. So let's focus on, let's use an example. I mean, and we can even use an example in here of concentrating on a problem rather than an objective, right? Of something benign, right? That we've spent a lot of energy on that really doesn't matter. We could talk about this morning.
Okay.
Right. You had a message from a client who you had an account that you absorbed from somebody who left. Right. And they were offered an upgrade that you didn't offer, but somebody else offered. And now we've got a team of people trying to collect money on in an error-filled, I guess, perspective of how the job was created and developed in the first place. Now, if we really boil this down like that 30,000-foot perspective, if we have to give a discount for a couple $100 on a job that has a $10,000 balance, give the discount. Because why? Because if the discount gets focused on for, like, should we give it? Should we not give it? Did this actually happen? Should we review the 700 messages that happened on this account and read line by line the history of the job account? Find out, was this really said? Should we have this conversation? Should we escalate this conversation to upper level management to see if this actually did happen, and then them have to do those same steps to investigate it? Let's talk about how much time went into this decision of giving a discount. In payroll cost, it would be more than the actual discount. It would be 10 times more than the actual discount if you talk about not just the payroll cost, but the opportunity cost. Right. And we did this exercise in the organization when when Kevin was here, when he was a business consultant that came in and worked with us for about 2 months. And
blood walling.
we were blood walling, but we also did this exercise where we broke down what our hourly opportunity cost was as a producer. So
Right.
when I say producers, that's somebody who generates sales or revenue for an organization. If you're a producer and you take your year and then you boil that revenue figure down, so like some of our guys produced 800,000, whereas other guys produced 2 million, right? You take whatever that total sum was on the 12 months and you break that down into 280 working hours, which is how many are in a year, or 2,080 working
Yeah.
hours. That's your opportunity cost.
Right.
So for me, for instance, I sold over 2 million that year. So my opportunity cost to take a 1 hour long phone call was more than $3,000.
Right.
I have a conversation with somebody for $100 discount, and I have an hour-long conversation, even a half an hour conversation. I just lost $1,500 in opportunity, not
Right.
to mention the payroll that went into all of the investigation. So it's like, if we major in the minors and we look at these tiny things, it's like, why not just make the client happy and move on so we can focus on our real objective, which is producing the volume of the organization that our goal was at the beginning of the year,
Right.
so that we can narrow down and shape down everything and produce the right net figure and then reinvest that in. That's the real objective.
Right.
Right. But we're focused on the problem, which is, was it said or was it not said?
Right.
It's like, who gives a shit?
Right.
You know, it's like, maybe if it turned into something where it's going to be an exorbitant amount of money, then we do some investigation because the juice is worth the squeeze.
Right.
Right. But if it's not worth the squeeze and you know that superficially from the problem that this is, it's not a problem.
Right.
It's like, let's just move on and let's change that in the future. How can we avoid that in the future? Well, make sure every salesperson writes down every promise they give to their client on paper, on the
Right.
contract. It's written down, it's transitioned. If everything's written down, then it actually happened and we have traceable data. We don't have to go looking for things and fishing in the dark.
So it's funny because this last bullet point in the notes that I prepared for us said, I think that a lot of people tend to forget the bullet affects decision making, right?
Mhm.
And if it almost can sometimes paralyze somebody
Mhm.
of the fear of doing something tiny wrong,
Mhm.
right? It's like, well, I can't mess this up,
Mhm.
right? Because if I put, that we need this many of this roof accessory on a roof, and there's this many, and we're off by one, man, is it like that's going to hold everything up, and then they're spinning in their head,
Mhm.
right? And then they go, I have to get back out there, go get more pictures,
Mhm.
right? And then they waste an hour and a half going out to get more pictures,
Mhm.
right? Whatever that may be. And it's like, this is a $17 part,
Mhm.
right? We could probably just have it on the truck,
Let's just order an extra one.
right?
Yeah. Take it back if we need to.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, in the grand scheme of things, how much does this one small error affect the job?
As a company, and actually in the Buddy Not a Boss category, when we move into that one, there's some real similarities to what we just transitioned through as an organization.
Mhm.
I was talking about transitioning from a family to a business.
Right.
That was the subsection of the chapter. But that tends to happen. So when we set this framework in motion of this is the proper way to turn this job in, or this is the proper protocol to operate by, and so on and so forth, there's a lot of times that people start spinning their wheels and thinking too intense, with more energy than they should factor in, because we as managers have failed to explain to them the why factor.
Right.
And the why factor is a lot less debilitating than they
Right.
think that it is, right?
Right.
It's more or less, let's just avoid additional work for the other person so you get this information and you move on. But we don't need to overthink all of these different things. But when we do, actually, I want to read an excerpt from the book because I think it was pretty useful. It's the very first paragraph in the book. It says, Oscar B. Faribi Jr., the president of Goodman, Seeger, and Hogan Residential Sales Corporation, described this fatal error when he commented, one reason for the lack of effectiveness on the part of so many managers is that they major in the minors. When I asked just what this meant, he responded that he observed that many managers spend as much as 90% of their time dealing with problems that only influence 10% of their productivity. In many instances, they become so involved with problems that they totally lose sight of their objectives.
Right.
So it's like, let's give a why factor, let's give a groundwork, but then let's also give them support so that there's there's ability for you to fall down without it being incredibly troublesome or detrimental thing for your progress as a professional.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just having this conversation with our estimator yesterday, and he was like, we were talking about the expectations of some people in production for things to always be 100% correct. And I said, and he agreed with me, but I said, my expectation for my guys is that it's 90 to 95% correct, right? They can't, we can't operate from the basis of perfection because that doesn't allow room for error. We're in construction. There's error, right? And to hold that expectation of, especially new people, it's like what we're going to do is we're going to flounder their motivation by focusing on the little shit, right? Rather than like, is it more valuable for me to have this guy run back out, go get a bunch of pictures, when in that same time he could have potentially developed 3 new opportunities, right? Or could we be a little bit more creative in our problem solving, right?
Yep. So there's a reason behind everything that's set in place. When protocol is established, there's a reason that it's there. But we have to train our team members, and we have to move away from this problem focused thinking.
Right.
And we have to train our team members to realize that they're not heart surgeons.
Right.
You can control the controllables. Like you said, it's construction. I mean, everybody that watches these videos might be in different, fields of business, but it's probably pretty similar. There are some things you can control.
Right.
So control them. And there are a lot of things that you just cannot control. So adapt to them. Right. So this was a piece that my mentor gave me when I first transitioned to management. I mentioned it before, but it's the most powerful thing he even told me the whole time, which was I was having a really hard time making a decision on how I wanted to handle the problem employee. Right. And he goes, Christian, are you a heart surgeon? And I said, no. I was like, but why are you asking me that? He goes, because heart surgeons, when they make a mistake, somebody's heart blows up. Right. So if you're a heart surgeon, be perfect. But, but if you're not a heart surgeon, or the decision that you're making or the problem that you're solving is not going to literally kill somebody, make a judgment call. If it's the wrong one, correct it, revise it for the future, notate it, use your brain. Or keep it running because it was the right decision, and move on to things that are actually going to help you achieve your objective. Right. Point blank, period. Let's make a decision. Let's move on. If it's wrong, correct it, revise it for the future. Right. This is all it needs to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think that. Yeah, I think. Everybody strives to do. I genuinely believe in most circumstances people will always try their best, right? But I think that it's when I see this subject, the concentrated problems rather than objectives, I always think of too many chefs in the kitchen, right? Because it's like one brain can make a problem that's the size of a piece of sand into a sand castle. 5 brains can make it into a mountain,
an empire of sand.
Right. So, but I mean, it's. I think that, and I've seen it in here, especially throughout the growth of the company. But it's amazing how big something very small can become. But it's also pretty amazing if you have all the people on the same thought plane, how quickly something can just get resolved and moved on with.
And so I mentioned that there's a piece in the next. So let's get over to that buddy not boss thing, but not right this second. There's a piece in there where they're talking about the transition from a small business into a big business and how hard it is for people who are friends with people to become managers of those same friends. Well, the same thing happens when your business is evolving. It's not just the people that you're managing, but it's the metrics and the protocols and things that you're managing. Like it's a new level and it's a new devil, right? And it gets harder to do things. So what we've had to do as an organization is narrow down roles and responsibilities to each individual title.
Right.
If this doesn't fall in your leg and it's not your monkey, push it to the person whose monkey that it is and leave it there. Because that group consensus, that's what I was talking about at the beginning of this conversation. It's like, how many dollars have we wasted over time thinking about problems as a team and making them more than they should have been? Right.
Or just floundering in them and not coming up with a solution for weeks.
Right. And we've even gone farther than this as a group this year when we started implementing the 1-3-1, CEO structure, but in every level of the business. It's like, okay, so you have a problem. I want you to bring me 3 solutions that are well researched and tell me what your recommendation is on that one, or on which 3 you would choose if it were you. Chances are you did all the critical thinking. It's probably smart. We're going to go with that one.
Right.
Then I've eliminated all that wasted time to fix a problem that was somebody else's realm to fix, so on and so forth.
Right. Let's jump into
John Cena.
being a buddy, not a boss.
I can't not do it when someone goes like this. John Cena. I just feel like somebody should jump off the top of the room and just elbow drop the table.
Smash JD's table.
Yeah. No, don't. This is a nice table.
Yeah. So, be a buddy, not a boss. This, in my opinion, in small business, this is the Achilles heel.
100% of the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's, I would say, so much so that it's make or break, right? And understanding the distinction of where those boundaries are.
We talked about this on a different video just recently. I don't remember which one it was, but it's like, if you think about the true amount of time you spend working, right? So like you spend 40 of 168 hours of your week working.
Right.
Sometimes more. Some people are in 40, 60 hours, sometimes a little bit less, whatever.
Just to say, we probably spend 60.
Something like that, 50 to 60, But, if you think about that percentage of your time, and then you also think about the fact that you're sleeping for
another
8 times 7,
40.
40. What's 8 times 7? Why can't I think of this number? 56?
56.
Okay. So you're sleeping for 56. You have a very narrow amount of time that's spent outside of the business.
Yeah.
It's really difficult not to blur the lines between professional and personal because you spend so much time that they become family, right? But the problem is, actually, they nailed it on the head, and it's been something that I've always said as a manager. So I'm just going to read it on here. Never do anything with an employee that you would not do with your firm's number 1 client or customer.
Right.
And why? Right? Well, what happens when you're out? You take your team members out drinking. Right. This isn't a problem that either you and I have. It would have been 14 years ago for you, 5 years ago, 4 years ago for me, whatever. But when they see you in a buddy situation, they see you let down, your prefrontal cortex is down, you're not thinking from the correct strategies, you're not thinking about the business as you make decisions, and they see some of your character that's been latent inside of you come out. Do you think that they're going to give you the same level of respect when you get back to the office the next day?
Never.
They're going to look at you like you're a bro.
Yeah.
Right? This is a frat house now. We're going to have each other's backs. I'm going to make a mistake, and he's going to have my back.
He'll cover for me.
But when you don't have their back and you try to nail them to it, right? Hold them accountable to whatever action that they had. They're not going to receive that.
Why are you doing that? I thought we were bros.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So
you can't discipline me now.
The military has fraternization policies,
right?
And they always have. Officers cannot fraternize with, soldiers. I don't remember the ranks and whatever, but it's like the second you elevate yourself, you're not allowed in that. I mean, that's punishable.
Yeah, I mean, you're literally in different barracks. You're in,
it's punishable, like stripping your rank or kicking you out of the military if you're fraternizing. But they're on such a large scale in comparison to a small business. They understand why fraternization is really a bad thing, right? Because if you need to create a system of accountability and a streamlined system for all your procedures to go through, there has to be people making sure that you're always connecting the dots within each one of those transitionary steps through
Right.
the procedural milestones, right? That's what the manager's job is. Let's make sure, ensure flow from start to finish, right? And if you have people who fail to be able to receive the respect that they need to narrow it down to fit through that, threshold or whatever, or they're too much of a buddy with this person and they just let it slide through, one of two things is going to happen. It's going to break down your relationship with this person, or it's going to completely destroy your ability to put out a good product.
Right.
One or the other.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, the bullet points I have down are blurs professional boundaries, complicates decision making, can lead to favoritism, undermines leadership effectiveness, right? But I look at like, if I spend a bunch of time with somebody outside of the office, right? Developing a relationship, more or less, a friendship, even with my management experience, it's not comfortable disciplining that person afterwards.
No.
At all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, shit, I really don't want to do this because I know this is going to affect this person this way, right? And it's going to, have a ripple effect in their productivity. It's going to have this, So it's like, I look at it like, the minute you let somebody too far in, right? In the sense of like, this is my life outside of this place, more or less, in any aspect, really. Like, it's unbeknownst to a lot of managers, they're undermining themselves tremendously.
So there's some funny things that happen that I've noticed. I don't actually like to do work for my family members or my friends.
Right.
Like, I'll do it, and I'll do it really well. But the reason I don't like to do it is because I cannot act the same structured manner that I did before.
Right.
It's impossible because they don't take me seriously. They're like, I knew you when you were crapping your pants when you were 2, dude. Like, don't equalize your business stature with me.
Don't try to be equal stature with me.
So there's that piece, but then there's also like the unsaid expectation that they're going to get some kind of discount or you're going to scratch my back a couple times through this and whatever it is they're expecting more than your average person that you don't know.
Right.
But the same thing happens, the reason I brought that up, the same thing happens when you're managing somebody who's a friend or a family member, whether that was before, like the friendship was before or established during, there's unsaid expectations between the two of them that you're going to do more for them than you did for anybody else.
Right.
And when that's seen by the other people too, because ultimately it's going to happen, it decays your relationship with everybody else that you manage.
Right.
Right. Unless you just decide to be friends with all of them. And in that case, are you really going to produce a high producing team?
No, I mean, you lose very quickly, you lose influence, right? Because they feel to be on a, like, subconsciously the brain, if we go out and do the same activity, for the same result, having fun, whatever it is, right? Subconsciously, I am now putting myself on an equal playing field with that person, right? What I do for fun, what I do outside of work, what I do, is the same as what you do. So that now makes me more relatable, but it also extinguishes some of my leadership, influence, ability to discipline, etc. I mean, we brought on somebody a couple months ago that I've known for 9 years, right? And I intentionally told him, and I told our sales manager, I said, I am intentionally distancing myself from you, right? Because I don't want there to be the perception of favoritism. I don't want there to be I don't want there to be any sort of perception of accelerated path because you know me, right? And I want you to cognizantly try to not reach out to me as much as you can and lean on your direct report because I don't want to undermine him, right? With using the fact that I've known you for a decade to your advantage. There's no advantage. I need you to act as if you don't know me.
Yep.
Right? But I mean, I set that boundary with him from day one, right?
Well, that's just being effective. And there's a part in the book about what happens when somebody transitions from the ranks, right? So let's call them a salesperson, and then they get elected to be sales manager, but they've been spending their last 2 years equalized with the other people.
Right.
The ones that do it the best are not the ones that, without any warning, just become the manager and start barking orders because they're never going to be taken seriously.
Right.
The ones, did I say the best?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I meant the ones that don't do it the best.
Right.
But the ones who do it the best are the ones who sit down with each one of those people and say, look, we've developed a relationship and I'm always going to be somebody you can count on. But I have to protect my position with the company and I have to protect the company as a whole. So I'm going to embody the characteristics I'm supposed to have and I'm going to treat you this way. I'm going to understand what your character is and what your productivity ability, what I know about you is, and I'm going to give you that, consideration.
Right.
If you fail in those categories, I'm going to talk to you about it. And I expect you to do the same with me if I'm failing as a manager.
Right.
That's a good transition.
Yep.
Same as what you're just talking about. That was a fantastic transition because you set groundwork and set boundaries.
Right.
If you don't set boundaries, the line is blurred.
Right. Yeah, and then we get into the, one of the other errors that we've previously talked about, where it's, people feel like they're getting leapfrogged over, right? And it's like, well, I'm just going to go to Ryan because it's easier to have a conversation with him because I know him. Mm-hmm. Or it's, I may get an answer that I want from him, and I might not get that answer from you.
Well, think about, remember when we were talking about the demise of the business that boiled down to a singular event, in my opinion, when I worked for that gym company. Mm-hmm. The demise, the origin of this problem was specifically nepotism, right? A person was elected because their family, to do something they were not qualified to do. Mm-hmm. There was a mutiny around them because nobody respected them.
And that was a big business.
It was a big business, very big business. And more than half of the management in the entire organization was lost in a day because of the mutiny and because the company took the side of, let me support my decision to favor one person over everybody else. Right. Thinking everybody's expendable. I mean, that's literally the staff in the side, right? Mm-hmm. That was the death blow to an organization that was nationwide. Right. So we have to realize these aren't just small problems. When you don't have a border between being a buddy and a boss, these things can compound and become incredibly detrimental. Right. But I did want to mention one thing. So they were talking about being a family, not a business. So I mentioned this before. Yep. I know as a company, what we had to do, we had to really, we literally had to press pause on the company because we were operating as a family, there's a lot of sayings, like a family-run business is not short-lived, but you never leave. Right. You're imprisoned to the family-run business because the blurred lines and because of the exceptions that are made, and because of how you have to treat them differently than you would somebody who's they're being paid, but you can't demand the same expectations. So we brought in a business consultant, and when we established those roles and responsibilities, it wasn't easy, right? It took us. We're in a year and a half into establishing roles and responsibilities and really narrowing things down, and there's still friction. Mm-hmm. But if we don't find a way to separate the layers of management and direct the channels of communication and make sure that people report to the right person and it's the right person that they're reporting to, and that person's operating with these fatal errors not within their repertoire, right? If we don't do that, then we're just leaving blurred lines. And if you take that and you somehow become successful enough to set up 2 units or 3 units or 4 units, and you have those integral problems, you're going back to what we talked about last week, where you're hemorrhaging in every one of those units. Right. It's like you're lucky to be in the black. Right. You're lucky to be in the black. Yeah. Right. As opposed to just expecting to be in the black and then constantly progressing forward. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's funny because I distinctly remember it was probably maybe a month or so into when the business consultant was here, and I remember having a conversation with you specifically about with your previous partner, there was a frequent, everybody would go to you, right? Because, well, one, you were sane. And two, I think that people tangibly understood that you had their well-being in mind, right? As well as the companies. But I remember having a conversation with you mid-spring of last year, and you said, I'm intentionally distancing myself from people in the company to create that boundary, right? And I received that information, and I was like, that sucks, right? But at the same time, I was like, okay, I get it. Like, I 100% get it, right? Because there's a tremendous amount of risk for you to not do that, right? So I've like more or less the last, I don't know, I'd say year and a half or so, intentionally honored that boundary in the sense of like, I won't call this guy after work hours. I won't talk to him on the weekends. And that's okay, right? And it's, in my opinion, it's actually, and I can just speak from my perspective just because, you know, I can only vouch for myself, but for me, I think it's been nothing but beneficial, right? Because it inherently over the last year and a half has created what I would consider to be a healthy boundary of like, I know at the end of the day that you care about my well-being, you care about me, but I don't need to be, we don't have to hang out and be best buddies on the weekend for me to know that, right? And what it allows, in my opinion, is a much greater playing field of professional development. Because it's like, now there's a stature of, we have a job to get done, and there's less gray area of feelings, I guess you'd say, right?
Well, I appreciate you acknowledging that, because it has been, and will continue to be a very difficult thing for me. Because for the first 3.5 years of the company's development, I was involved with legitimately everything that happened, every decision, every up and down, no matter what it was. There was no established. It was like it came to a point where it was like, why on earth am I paying for people to run legs of business if I'm just going to run them myself, right? So I'm like holding onto the wheel like this, and it's ultimately crushing me as a person. I have zero home life.
Right.
You know, I have zero this. I have, you know, it just was like, this is all consuming. And it was very uncomfortable to take a step back from things and allow people the distance that's necessary to grow in their leg, in their job, in their title, whatever it is. It's like nails on a chalkboard, not to hear the words that are being said, but to be outside of the room when training is happening. It's like I'm like, I should be in there. And I'm sitting there just like, it's okay.
Right.
Trust the people, trust the process. It's okay. You know, review afterwards, correct. Do the things, you know, automate, delegate, you know, whatever. Like, let's do the thing we're supposed to. But it's done two things for the organization. It separated me far enough to be able to have a clear mind on which things are the smartest and most prioritized objectives that we need to tackle day by day, week by week, whatever. And it's allowed me to serve my own purposes as well, which is to be able to have a fully functioning business and not be consumed by it. Right. One of my biggest goals is the fishing trip.
Right.
You know, JDO reminded me of it every time I get into this little conundrum in my head, like I'm not doing enough. You know, be like, dude, fishing trip. You got to think about the fishing trip. And what this is, for the people who haven't watched the other videos, the proverbial fishing trip. If you can leave on a moment's notice to go on a two-week fishing trip, 3-week fishing trip, whatever it is, without having contact to your team, and you come back and they're in the same position or better than they were when you left, then you have a business you are running.
Not running you.
It's not running you.
Yep.
Right? And so I'm trying to get there. It's really difficult, but we're never going to get there if you don't take those steps to create boundaries within every leg of the business without creating roles and responsibilities. And by getting rid of the buddy boss boundary, creating a buddy boss boundary, not getting rid of it, because everybody's going to be friends and we're going to be, cohesive. But as a manager, you have to think from a different and more elevated playing field. Not only is it just for the well-being of the company, it's the well-being of your position in that company.
Right.
It's like if you can't create that division, you cannot unseparate or unblur those lines, you're not going to be in that position for very long. Right? Because the company needs somebody to with exacting execution, push the protocol and create the product the way it's supposed to be. And if you're not the right guy, they're going to find somebody else who is. Right?
Yeah. It's the proverbial phrase of, and when I used to do business consulting with Gym Launch, it's the proverbial phrase of, you want to get to the place where you work on your business, not in your business, right? And then every business owner is like, yeah, and they're like, when should I expect that? I'm like, a few years. Right? It takes quite some time.
Yeah,
right?
I know for certain, even with as much roles and responsibilities and people that we've put in places, I know for certain I'll never be able to, not never be able to, but I don't have the things in place that are necessary to just let the business run. And I won't for probably 5 to 6, 7 years from right now. And that's assuming that we hit every milestone in between.
Well, that I've shared with you the experience that I had when my gym was six and a half years old, and I left. I went to Cozumel, Mexico for, I think, like 13 days, and the business owner in me was frantic, right? Like I was checking my laptop, checking my emails. I would go back to the hotel room 2 or 3 times a day, and just because the Wi-Fi was there, and I'd be like, did anything happen? Did anything happen?
Yeah.
Right. And then I remember like day 3, day 4 of the trip, I called my GM and I was like, what's going on? Is everything good? He's like, everything's fine, dude. Stop calling me. And I was like, okay. And I left. Cozumel came back. Everything was better, right, than when I left. And I started to realize like, oh, maybe my sense of control here is more detrimental than good. Right. And then I realized like, oh, now I have a little bit of freedom. Now I can actually work on the business and perfect things or, come up with different growth strategies or whatever that is, which is so much more fun.
Yeah. Well, right now I have the convenience to pick and choose which things I want to dive into and which things don't need me to dive into. Right. It's like, it's a very freeing feeling. Like I said, we're not to the point where I think I could just leave and it just keeps running. I think there's a lot of growth that we have to do and milestones and accounts that need to be built and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's like, if this leg is failing or this division of this leg is failing, I could just pick myself and put it right there, deduce problems. And then when we figured out how to automate those or automate the systems, delegate it to the right person, get the right person to hold the monkey and eliminate the excess baggage, the things that are getting in the way, I can step right back out and go into something else. Right. And that is it's a great thing for me. But the only way that this ever, and the reason we're talking about it so much, just to reiterate for those guys who think that we just get on rabbit holes, because we do get on rabbit holes, but it's like the only way for this to happen is for the company to establish correct boundaries between personnel. Being a buddy, not a boss, is a very detrimental thing for overall growth and for your job security as a manager.
Very. Yeah. Well, I think we're good on that note. Want to wrap this up, and then next week we at 8, 9 next week?
7 and 9 and 10.
9, 10. Sweet.
9 and 10, and then we'll do 3 in the last one and go into something else.
So maybe something a little bit more fun for all the people that don't necessarily get the same riz out of management conversation.
The what is it, the prospector theory?
Yeah.
Chip and Ray. The way that I think about all these videos and the stuff that we're putting out is eventually we're going to cross that little threshold and grab that diamond.
Yep.
And then people are going to watch these 2 years from now and they're like, wow, this is great information. I'm like, I know, dude, you should have watched it 2 years ago.
Well, it's funny you mention that because like you look at, I mean, even some of the most successful podcasts in the world, right? Like a perfect example is one that Alex did, right? He started this podcast in the tail end, I think the last 2 years of Gym Lunch. The episodes were like 30 minutes, but it was just him solo talking about business, right? And he would publicize it, put it out. All the people in the company would listen to it. You know, some customers would listen to it. But you'd look at like his first, I think it was genuinely his first like 500 podcasts.
Wow.
Had less than 100 listens, right? Now he's on like 475, and they all have millions and millions of listens, right? But it's like the endurance of chipping away, right?
Well, that being said, we do like to adapt. So anybody who comments on these videos, anybody who jumps in and starts engaging with things, we'll start putting tailor-fit and well-researched work in front of you. We might even ask you to be on the podcast if what you bring up is worth the wait, right? So jump in, engage. Thank you guys for tuning in. Be a boss, not a buddy. It's good for your soul.
Yeah, and if you guys have any specific ideas that you want us to touch on in regards to, you know, business leadership or just roofing in general, maybe you're a homeowner who has some questions or bad experiences in the past, comment on it. Or shoot us a message. We'll be happy to put it in.
I want some tips on how to get biceps and forearms like this guy. You know, we know those ones too.
Yeah. Talk about chipping away.
Flex king.
So, all righty.
All right. Have a good one.